The digital notification of my husband's treachery arrived not with a whimper, but with a triumphant, malicious, haha, a stark punctuation mark on 12 years of marriage. It flashed onto my screen while I was assisting a client at my boutique, illuminating the delicate floral patterns of a silk scarf Mrs. Davies was considering. I'm done. I'm moving to St. Azure with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already cleared out our joint bank account. Haha. My hands remained steady as I read the words, the vibrant colors of the scarf blurring for a split second. My voice was even, a calm oasis in a sudden storm, as I helped Mrs. Davies select her new accessory, offering advice on how the emerald green would complement her eyes. The only hint that my husband of 12 years had just demolished our shared life via a text message was a subtle, almost imperceptible narrowing of my eyes, a tightening around the corners that only I would notice. I waited until Mrs. Davies, her purchase carefully wrapped in our distinctive silver paper, had departed with a cheerful "Thank you, Amelia," before I allowed myself a slow, deliberate exhale. Then I typed out my reply. Good luck. My name is Amelia, and at 38, I had just been handed the most heartless farewell in history. But while Richard was likely reveling in his dramatic departure, picturing me devastated, weeping into a pile of our shared memories, I was methodically locking up my boutique for the evening. The faint scent of expensive leather and French perfume filled the air, a familiar comfort. The indicators had been present for months, a slow, insidious erosion of our bond, the supposed late nights at the office that never quite aligned with the diminished figures on his pay stubs, the newfound secrecy around his phone, always face down or clutched protectively in his hand, his sudden obsession with the gym that yielded more superficial preening than actual fitness, and a new wardrobe of designer jeans and brightly colored shirts in a desperate, almost pathetic attempt to reclaim his lost youth. He'd even started quoting TikTok trends at the dinner table, completely missing the mark. 3 months ago, a physical receipt, carelessly discarded in his briefcase, sealed my suspicions. It was for an intimate dinner for two at a Michelin-starred restaurant, on a night he swore he was working late on a crucial presentation. The cost of the champagne alone had been more than our entire weekly grocery bill. That very evening, after he'd finally drifted off, feigning exhaustion, I established a private bank account with a different financial institution, one I had already quietly researched. A week later, when he brought up his suggestion to merge our finances for simplicity's sake, a suggestion he'd previously dismissed as too complicated for years, I had agreed with a warm, unsuspecting smile, all while systematically transferring my personal savings, accrued over years from my boutique's profits, into my new, separate account. The joint account he had just proudly emptied contained just enough to avoid raising his suspicions, about 2 months of standard deposits, mainly for household bills. The remainder of my substantial assets was secured elsewhere, along with comprehensive, time-stamped records of every questionable transaction he had made over the last year, compiled meticulously in a digital file. My phone chimed again, vibrating against the smooth marble counter. Don't even think about pleading. Chloe and I are leaving tomorrow. I'll arrange for my belongings to be picked up later. Chloe, the new receptionist at his firm, fresh out of college. I had met her at the company holiday party, a whirlwind of youthful enthusiasm. I'd seen her laugh excessively, a little too loudly, at Richard's stale jokes, and observed the way her hand lingered on his arm when she thought no one, especially not his wife, was watching. She was young enough to be his child, and naive enough to believe she was unique, the one who finally understood him. I ignored his message, slipping my phone into my blazer pocket. Instead, I contacted my lawyer, Ms. Evelyn Reed, the same sharp, No-nonsense legal professional I had discreetly consulted 2 months prior when I found the hotel charges on our shared credit card statement. A weekend getaway to a quaint in 2 states over. For two, not one. It's time, I stated plainly, the calm in my voice belying the magnitude of the words. He's just played his hand. The documents are prepared, Amelia, she confirmed immediately, her voice crisp and efficient. I will file them first thing in the morning. Do you want him served in St. Azure, perhaps a little surprise on his tropical getaway? No, there's no hurry, I replied, a slow smile forming. Let him savor his perceived victory for a while. Let him think he's won the first round. Another text arrived from Richard, punctuated by his familiar self-importance. I realize this must be difficult for you. You're not getting any younger, after all. At least you have your quaint little business to keep you occupied. My quaint little business. The successful boutique I had built from the ground up over 15 arduous years, pouring my heart, soul, and considerable business acumen into it. The one that consistently brought in more revenue than his mid-level management job, and the one whose profits I had diligently kept separate from our shared finances, much to his chagrin. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile, envisioning the certified legal letters that would soon greet him in St. Azure, perhaps while he was sipping a fruity cocktail on the beach. Let him have his fleeting moment of triumph. It would be short-lived. I spent the evening in our house, my house, as I had inherited it from my grandmother, a formidable woman who believed strongly in independence and had wisely kept the deeds solely in my name, ignoring Richard's persistent, increasingly irritated hints to add him. It was another fortunate instinct that had served me well. While compiling the necessary paperwork for Evelyn, sorting through bank statements and property deeds, I came across our wedding album. Richard looked so different back then, younger, less burdened, before his midlife crisis transformed him into a parody of his former self. Now, he wore shirts that were too snug for his softening physique, tried desperately to fit in with the 20-somethings in his office, and used slang that sounded absurd coming from a 45-year-old man, a man whose receding hairline and expanding waistline betrayed his age far more than mine ever could. My phone continued to buzz with messages from him, each one more condescending, more self-congratulatory than the last. I've been orchestrating this for months, Amelia. Chloe understands me in a way you never did. She truly appreciates my ambition. You'll manage. Perhaps you'll meet someone more your own age, someone less demanding. I've already spoken to my family. They agree we had grown apart. It's really no one's fault, just a natural evolution. I took a screenshot of every single message, adding them to my growing file of evidence, a digital testament to his premeditation and cruelty. Let him dig his own grave with every boastful word. Evelyn would appreciate his candid admission of long-term planning and his joyful announcement about emptying our bank account. It was a gold mine of legal ammunition. The final text captured my attention, almost making me laugh out loud. By the way, I used the joint card for our flights and hotel. Think of it as my parting gift. LOL. Perfect. I called the credit card company, my finger hovering over the contact for their fraud department. This is Amelia Harrison speaking. I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel a card immediately. Of course, ma'am. Can you specify the charges? The polite representative inquired. 2 first-class tickets to St. Azure, booked today. Hotel charges at the Coral Sands Resort, also booked today. And I need to have my husband, Richard Harrison, removed as an authorized user, effective immediately. Do you have any proof of the fraud, ma'am? This is a serious accusation. I do, I stated, my voice laced with a subtle satisfaction. I have multiple text messages from my husband confessing to intentionally using our joint card to fund travel with his girlfriend after draining our joint bank account. I can forward them to you right now as proof of his confession and premeditation." The agent's professional demeanor barely concealed a note of surprised satisfaction as she noted down the details and began the process of voiding the charges. Richard and Chloe would show up at the airport tomorrow, brimming with anticipation for their romantic escape, only to discover their first-class tickets were worthless and their luxurious hotel reservation had been canceled. A small, but deeply satisfying victory. My phone buzzed once more, a final echo of his arrogance. "Don't stress about the house. I'll let you live there until you find a smaller place. Consider it an act of generosity." I actually laughed out loud at that, a genuine, uninhibited burst of amusement. Did he genuinely believe he had any entitlement to my grandmother's property, the home I had loved and cared for all these years? Had his ego become so inflated that he had completely forgotten whose name was on the deed, whose family history permeated every beam and brick? Another buzz. "And I know the shop is important to you. We can agree on a fair price for your half." My half of my own business that I had conceived, financed, and grown myself, often working 18-hour days, all while he griped about my long hours and dismissed it as my little hobby. I poured myself a glass of wine, the premium, aged Cabernet Sauvignon I had been reserving for a truly momentous occasion, perhaps a decade anniversary of the boutique's grand opening. This certainly qualified. Tonight, I would savor the quiet. Tomorrow, Richard would be educated on some harsh realities about property law, separate assets, and the true value of hard work. But tonight, I would relish the tranquility and start plotting my next move, a much more fulfilling one than any of his petty schemes. The following morning was met with a barrage of increasingly irate texts from Richard, each one more frantic than the last. "What have you done to our credit card? The airline is refusing to honor our tickets. We're stuck. The hotel canceled our reservation. Answer your phone, Amelia. This isn't funny." He sounded desperate, utterly unhinged. I silenced my phone and made my way to my boutique, whistling a little tune. Friday was consistently our busiest day, and a new shipment of exquisite Italian designer handbags awaited me, beckoning with their buttery soft leather and gleaming hardware. Life continues, even thrives, when your husband absconds with a receptionist young enough to be his daughter and then falls flat on his face. Around midday, his mother, Susan, called, her voice tinged with a familiar, weary disappointment. "Amelia, dear, Richard told us everything. About how you'd become so difficult and controlling, how you forced him into this. He says you're now being vindictive and sabotaging his travel plans, leaving him stranded at the airport." I put her on speakerphone as I meticulously arranged a new window display, showcasing our latest collection of vibrant spring dresses. Did he happen to mention draining our joint account and using our shared credit card to buy first-class tickets for himself and his girlfriend, after boasting about it in a text message? I asked, my voice calm, almost detached. There was a pregnant silence on the other end, a pause long enough to fit all of Richard's self-deception into. "Well, he said you gave him no other option, that you've been cold and distant, that he felt unappreciated." "Susan, I have his text messages. Do you care for me to read you the one where he boasted about taking our money, complete with a haha? Or perhaps the one where he made fun of my age and my quaint little business?" Another silence, even longer this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. He did seem a bit cruel in some of his messages. I told him that one about your age was entirely inappropriate. He said he was just venting. "I appreciate your call, Susan. I've always been fond of you. However, I think it's best we conclude this conversation. My lawyer has recommended minimal interaction with Richard's family during the legal proceedings to avoid any undue influence or perceived coercion. Proceedings? Already? He said it would be amicable, she exclaimed, her voice rising in alarm. Goodbye, Susan, I said gently, and ended the call. By late afternoon, Richard's sister, Jessica, had apparently taken to circulating the family gossip among our mutual friends. Apparently, Richard and Chloe were indeed stranded at a cheap motel near the airport, their St. Azure fantasy momentarily shattered, their grand escape reduced to a miserable purgatory. He had tried to use his personal credit cards, but they had been maxed out for months, another warning sign I had noted and filed away, a pattern of irresponsible spending. The picture Jessica painted was one of two petulant children throwing a tantrum, their carefully constructed facade of sophistication crumbling under the weight of financial reality. My lawyer called with an update, her tone betraying a hint of amusement. The emergency hearing is set for Monday morning. With his direct admission of emptying the joint account, the documented credit card fraud, and the evidence of his premeditation, we are in a very strong position to freeze all remaining assets and move for a swift resolution. Has he been served yet? I asked, feeling a prickle of anticipation. Not yet, but he will receive the papers at his new motel address, perhaps with his breakfast delivery. Speaking of which, his girlfriend's social media is a goldmine of evidence. She's been posting about their adventure all day, including some rather choice remarks about you and how some people just don't understand true love and passion. Quite dramatic. I smiled, thinking of my own collection of evidence, a full year of suspicious charges, hotel receipts, carefully recorded dates and times, and the increasingly damning text messages that proved his long-term premeditation. Richard had been so absorbed in his grand getaway, so utterly convinced of his own cleverness, that it never occurred to him I might be observing, waiting, and meticulously preparing for precisely this moment. He had walked right into the trap he thought he was setting for me. Another text buzzed on my phone, a final, desperate attempt to assert control. You think you're so clever, but I made copies of all the boutique's financial records. Half of that business is mine, Amelia. You won't get away with this. I forwarded the message to Evelyn, adding it to the expanding file of Richard's self-incriminating blunders. Let him learn about separate assets and business ownership the hard way. Sometimes, the most effective revenge is simply being ready. The emergency hearing on Monday was everything I had anticipated and more. Richard arrived dressed in his new youthful attire, designer jeans that were too tight for his age, and a blazer that screamed midlife crisis. His hair was slightly disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, a stark contrast to his earlier smug confidence. Chloe waited in the hallway, looking equally disheveled and surprisingly small, her youth glaringly apparent under the unforgiving courthouse lights. My lawyer, Evelyn Reed, was a picture of poised professionalism, her every movement purposeful. She methodically presented our case. Richard's jubilant text about clearing our account, his credit card fraud, and his documented history of concealed expenses, each piece of evidence painstakingly gathered over months of quiet observation. Your Honor, Richard's hastily retained lawyer began, a nervous tremor in his voice. My client acknowledges some impulsive decisions made under duress, but Mrs. Harrison's response has been vindictive and calculating, aimed solely at destroying his reputation. My colleague calls it calculating. I call it prudent, Evelyn retorted, her voice clear and resonant in the quiet courtroom. My client safeguarded her separate assets and kept meticulous records of her husband's suspicious financial activities over the past year. That isn't vindictiveness. It's smart business, good financial stewardship, and simple self-preservation. The judge, a stern-faced woman who looked like she'd seen it all, examined my documentation with a discerning eye, the separate property deed for the house, the boutique's incorporation papers filed solely in my name, and the diligent separation of business and personal finances that Richard had consistently complained about, calling it untrusting and unnecessary. "Mr. Harrison," the judge said, addressing Richard directly, her voice cutting through the tension. "You confessed via text message to intentionally emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to finance a trip with your girlfriend. Do you dispute this?" Richard shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "I was just trying to make a clean break, Your Honor. It was an emotional time." "By engaging in financial fraud?" the judge asked, raising an eyebrow, her gaze unwavering. "And now you are asserting rights to property that this documentation clearly shows is separate from any marital assets and has been since before your marriage?" "The business expanded significantly during our marriage," Richard's lawyer argued, clearly grasping at straws. "My client provided moral support and therefore is entitled to a share of its growth. The business was founded before the marriage," Evelyn cut in, her tone dismissive, and Mrs. Harrison maintained a strict, separate accounting of business and personal finances throughout its existence. "We have records of every dollar invested and earned, every receipt, every tax document." Mr. Harrison's moral support largely consisted of complaining about the long hours my client dedicated to building her successful enterprise. I watched Richard's face as the reality began to set in, his initial bluster replaced by a dawning horror. He had assumed this would be simple: empty the accounts, run away with his young girlfriend, and maybe lay claim to half of my successful business in the divorce, a nice little bonus. He had never taken the time to understand my insistence on keeping things separate and had ridiculed my careful bookkeeping as obsessive, a sign of my uptight nature. Now, those very habits were his undoing. "The court finds substantial evidence of financial misconduct," the judge declared, her gavel a sharp crack in the quiet room. "All shared assets are hereby frozen pending the final dissolution. Mr. Harrison is ordered to return any funds removed from the joint accounts within 24 hours and is expressly forbidden from interfering with Mrs. Harrison's business or property. Furthermore, he will be solely responsible for any debt incurred on the fraudulently used credit card." "But that money is gone," Richard protested, finally finding his voice, his face pale. "We used it on." "Then I advise you to find a way to replace it, Mr. Harrison," the judge interrupted, her voice firm and unyielding. "And Mr. Harrison, the court does not look kindly upon the use of shared credit cards to fund escapades with paramours, nor on the deliberate draining of joint accounts. This is a serious matter." Outside the courtroom, I overheard Chloe asking Richard about their plans for St. Azure, her voice sounding far less confident than it had in his texts. His reply was a muffled grumble, drowned out by the confident click of my heels on the marble floor as I headed back to the boutique, the business he had never bothered to understand or respect, and which now stood as a testament to my foresight. The following weeks saw a series of increasingly desperate maneuvers from Richard. He tried to claim the boutique was his idea, that he had invested his own money in its early stages, and even proposed that he had been my business partner all along, claims that were swiftly debunked by my meticulous records and Evelyn's unflappable presentation of facts. He even tried to involve the local police, claiming I had stolen his belongings, only to be politely informed it was a civil matter and that he was on the wrong side of a court order. "He's getting desperate," Evelyn noted during one of our calls, her voice almost amused. "His girlfriend's social media indicates they're now living in her small studio apartment. It seems that living on a receptionist's salary, especially when one is also supporting a 45-year-old man, isn't quite the glamorous life he envisioned." Richard's family began to contact me, their tone now markedly different from their initial accusations. We had no idea, Amelia, his sister Jessica confessed during an unexpected visit to the boutique, her gaze lingering on a display of elegant jewelry. He portrayed himself as the victim, claiming you were cold and controlling and that he had to get away. But then we saw his texts, the way he boasted about taking your money, and his behavior since. That's not the brother I thought I knew. He's truly lost his way. His mother, Susan, called again, this time in tears. The things he said about your age, about replacing you with someone younger. I thought I raised him better than that. I'm so ashamed of how he's behaved. I let their calls go to voicemail, sometimes listening to the first few seconds before deleting them. Their support might have been meaningful weeks ago, when I was fighting alone, but now it felt like rats abandoning a sinking ship, seeking to distance themselves from the wreckage. My focus was elsewhere. The boutique flourished, ironically fueled by local gossip about my situation. Women began visiting specifically to show their support, drawn by the story of quiet strength, often leaving with much more than they had intended to buy. My ex tried something similar, but I wasn't as prepared as you. One customer confided while purchasing a designer handbag, her eyes full of admiration. Men like that never expect us to be smarter than they are. My phone still buzzed occasionally with texts from Richard, his tone fluctuating wildly between rage and manipulation. You've destroyed everything. I never wanted to hurt you, Amelia. It was just a moment of weakness. You will regret being so vindictive. Can't we just work this out? That business would be nothing without my support, you know. I forwarded each message to Evelyn without a reply, letting him continue to dig his own hole, providing more and more evidence of his erratic behavior. Through the grapevine, and from Evelyn's updates, I learned that Chloe was indeed having second thoughts. Sharing her cramped studio apartment with a middle-aged man who couldn't support himself, who complained constantly about his unjust situation, was not the romantic adventure she had imagined. The age gap, which had seemed thrilling and rebellious during their clandestine hotel rendezvous, felt starkly different in the harsh, unflattering light of everyday reality. She posted about toxic relationships and learning from your mistakes yesterday, Evelyn mentioned during an update call, sounding genuinely amused. And she removed her relationship status this morning. I almost felt a pang of sympathy for Richard. Almost. But then I recalled his triumphant haha after telling me he had emptied our account, the casual cruelty of his remarks about my age, and his arrogant assumption that I would be helpless and broken without him. Instead of pity, I felt something else. Pride. Pride in my foresight, in my quiet resilience, and in my ability to protect myself while he consistently underestimated me. The final divorce hearing was a stark contrast to Richard's imagined victory. His arrogant demeanor was gone, replaced by a barely concealed panic and the deflated posture of a man who knew he was utterly defeated. Chloe was conspicuously absent. According to office chatter, she had moved on to a coworker her own age, someone who didn't require financial support or constantly blame his ex-wife for his problems. Richard had reverted to his old, ill-fitting clothes, the designer wardrobe presumably returned or sold to help repay the joint account he had drained. His lawyer looked exhausted, likely from the futile effort of finding loopholes in my well-documented separation of assets and his client's litany of self-incriminating actions. Your Honor, his lawyer tried one last time, his voice raspy. Despite the separate property documentation, my client contributed to the growth of his wife's business through moral support, emotional investment, and presence. Moral support? Evelyn interjected, cutting him off smoothly, a file of printouts in her hand. Like these text messages belittling Mrs. Harrison's business as a little shop. Or these social media posts referring to it as her hobby, while he vacationed with another woman. His presence was largely absent from the actual operations, Your Honor. The judge had clearly heard enough, her decision already made. The final settlement was a direct reflection of my careful planning and Richard's spectacular self-sabotage. I retained my house, my business, and all my separate assets, including the entirety of my substantial personal savings. Richard was left with his personal belongings, his heavily maxed-out personal credit cards, and his car, which was worth less than the outstanding loan on it. He would also be responsible for his legal fees, which, given his lawyer's desperate tactics, were undoubtedly substantial. "You've ruined me, Amelia," he hissed as we exited the courthouse, his face contorted with rage, completely oblivious to his own culpability. "I'll have to move back in with my parents, at 45 years old." "No, Richard," I corrected him calmly, meeting his furious gaze. "You ruined yourself. I just made sure you couldn't ruin me along with you." His mother, Susan, was waiting outside, her face etched with disappointment, ready to drive him to her house, his new, very temporary residence at 45. The irony of his predicament was not lost on anyone present. The man who had mocked my age and dismissed my hard work was now relegated to his childhood bedroom, while I continued to operate my successful, thriving enterprise. "You planned this all along, didn't you?" he accused, his voice thick with a defeated fury. "You knew this was going to happen. You set me up." "No," I replied calmly, adjusting the strap of my handbag, a new design from my own boutique. "I simply paid attention. And unlike you, I understood the value of keeping good records." His mother stepped between us, her hand gently but firmly on Richard's arm. "That's enough, Richard. You've embarrassed yourself enough for one day." As they walked away, I could hear her beginning her lecture, her voice carrying on the wind. "Honestly, what were you thinking? A 20-year-old? Draining bank accounts? Sending those awful texts? You brought this entirely upon yourself." I watched them vanish into the parking garage, feeling nothing but a profound sense of relief. Richard had thought he was dictating the end of our story with that cruel text. In reality, he had merely triggered the execution of my meticulously laid plans. My phone buzzed, not with messages from Richard this time, but with notifications of new orders from my boutique's thriving online store. Life was indeed moving on, just not in the direction he had ever imagined for me. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my boutique expanded to a second location in a bustling, upscale neighborhood across town. The irony was not lost on me. While Richard struggled to piece his life back together, living under his parents' roof and complaining incessantly, the little shop he had dismissed was flourishing. I had brought on 3 new employees, including a talented young designer, and launched an online store that was rapidly gaining a national following, shipping orders across the country. News of Richard's circumstances trickled back through mutual acquaintances, painting a picture of escalating desperation. He had ventured onto dating apps, only to find that women his own age were uninterested in a middle-aged man living with his parents who spoke constantly of his unjust divorce. Younger women, having learned of his history through the office rumor mill, kept their distance, wary of becoming his next escape plan. Chloe had apparently warned her friends about him, sharing screenshots of his desperate, manipulative pleas to win her back. His career had also taken a significant hit. The company's HR department, after an internal review prompted by the very public nature of his divorce and the emergency court filings, had initiated an investigation into his relationship with a subordinate. It ended in a formal reprimand and a significant reduction in his responsibilities. The promotion he had been anticipating for years was given to someone else, someone without a documented record of inappropriate relationships with reception staff. He tried to claim age discrimination, Jessica told me during an unexpected, rather awkward visit to the boutique. Said they were punishing him for dating someone younger. HR just added that complaint to his file, apparently. He's furious. I was surprised to see his sister in my store, but her visit spoke volumes about how completely Richard had alienated his own family. I know we didn't support you at first, she admitted, her fingers tracing the edge of a silk scarf, and I'm truly sorry for that. He played the victim so convincingly. But watching how he handled everything, how he behaved afterward, I'm ashamed we ever took his side. You were right all along. My lawyer, Evelyn, kept me informed of Richard's persistent attempts to contest the divorce settlement. Each petition was swiftly denied, his claims of unfair distribution dismissed due to the overwhelming evidence of his own actions and confessions. He actually tried to argue that his text about emptying the account was just a joke, a figure of speech, she told me, laughing. The judge just stared at him and asked if, made theft any less illegal. The boutique's growing success brought an unexpected form of validation and recognition. Local business journals wanted to feature my story, not as a scorned wife, but as a savvy entrepreneur who had protected her interests and expanded her empire in the face of adversity. Young business owners, both men and women, sought my advice on maintaining a clear separation between their business and personal finances, recognizing the wisdom in my actions. The best defense is preparation, I told one bright-eyed young woman who reminded me a little of Chloe, full of ambition and dreams. And always trust your gut. It will rarely lead you astray. Richard's mother called occasionally, usually after he had done something particularly self-destructive or embarrassing. He had dabbled in online gambling, hoping for a quick solution to his financial woes, only to plunge deeper into debt. He had become entangled in a ludicrous pyramid scheme that promised swift, incredible returns, losing what little money he had left. Each attempt to reclaim his former lifestyle, to prove he was still the big shot, only plunged him deeper into debt and despair. I don't know where we went wrong with him, she lamented during one call, her voice heavy with sorrow. His father and I offered to help him get back on his feet, if only he would take responsibility for his actions. But he's still blaming everyone else, you, Chloe, his company, the judge, even us for not bailing him out more completely. I listened with polite detachment, offering neutral responses. Their family drama was no longer my concern. My life was moving forward, filled with exciting plans for a third boutique location and a potential expansion into luxury accessories and bespoke jewelry. The only physical reminder of Richard's fleeting influence on my life was a framed screenshot hanging discreetly in my office. It was his final text before I finally blocked his number permanently. Have fun with your little shop. At least it'll keep you busy in your old age. Don't call me. Below it hung my latest business award, a gleaming trophy for Entrepreneur of the Year, a testament to the fact that sometimes the best revenge is simply to succeed on your own terms, far beyond anyone's cynical expectations. 1 year after the divorce, I hosted the grand opening of my third boutique, a spacious, elegant store in a prime downtown location. The event drew local media, and the story they wanted to cover was not about my failed marriage, but about a successful businesswoman expanding her brand, a testament to female empowerment and savvy financial planning. Richard's betrayal had become a mere footnote in my much larger, more inspiring story of entrepreneurial success. During the party, amidst the joyful chatter and clinking glasses, Chloe unexpectedly appeared. She looked older, more mature than I remembered, or perhaps I just felt that much stronger and more self-assured. She clutched her purse like a shield, shifting uncomfortably, her gaze darting around the bustling store. "Amelia," she said, her voice low and hesitant. I owe you an apology. A huge one. I believed everything he told me, about you being cold and controlling, about how you didn't support his dreams, how he was a victim. Then I saw him use the exact same manipulation tactics on me when things became difficult. When he blamed me for his problems, I continued to arrange a display of new designer sunglasses, a natural pose of relaxed confidence. "Those weren't his dreams, Chloe," I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "They were his escape plans. There's a fundamental difference." "I see that now," she admitted, a wave of regret crossing her face. She paused, then added, "He tried to move in with me permanently when you froze the accounts. He thought my studio apartment would be a temporary arrangement. After 2 weeks of him complaining about the size of my closet and suggesting I take out a loan for a bigger place because we needed more space, I finally understood what you meant about the difference between dreams and escapes, and between a partner and a parasite." I couldn't help but let out a soft laugh, a genuine, unburdened sound. "Let me guess. He had grand plans for your life, but no way to finance them?" "Exactly," she confirmed, a rueful smile playing on her lips. "Everything was going to magically fall into place once his investments matured, once he secured that next big promotion, once his cryptocurrency inevitably skyrocketed. It was all fantasy. I'm dating someone my own age now," she added, her eyes softening. "We have student loans and a tiny apartment, but at least we're building something real together." After she left, my assistant manager, Liam, a sharp young man with an eye for trends, came over, his eyebrows raised. "Was that the girlfriend?" "No," I replied, shaking my head with a slight smile. "That was just another woman who learned the same lesson I did, just a bit later." Speaking of which, I gestured to a young couple admiring our collection of new handbags. "Let's discuss your idea for expanding our accessories line. I think it has great potential." The boutique had evolved into more than just a business. It was a symbol of independence, resilience, and the quiet, potent power of preparation. Young entrepreneurs, particularly women, often came to me for guidance, and I always stressed the importance of protecting their assets, their autonomy, and their peace of mind. Richard's mother called one last time, not to talk about her son, but to thank me. "You taught our family an important lesson, Amelia," she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength I hadn't heard before, "about enabling poor behavior, about making excuses for cruelty." Richard is still living at home, still blaming everyone else for his problems. But we're no longer defending him. We're holding him accountable. That's your legacy to our family, showing us the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. I reflected on that unexpected legacy as I reviewed the architectural plans for a fourth location, even larger and more ambitious than the last. Richard's intention had been to diminish me, to trade me in for a younger model and seize half of everything I had built. Instead, he had inadvertently propelled me to become even stronger, more successful, and undeniably, unapologetically myself. 2 years after Richard's cruel text, I was invited to speak at a national women's business conference, a keynote address to an auditorium packed with aspiring and established entrepreneurs. The subject wasn't divorce or betrayal. It was about building and protecting a thriving business, about foresight and resilience. My story had transformed from a cautionary tale into one of inspiration. During the Q&A session, a woman, her voice trembling slightly, asked about the delicate balance of keeping business and personal finances separate in a marriage. "My husband says I'm being paranoid, that marriage means sharing everything," she confessed. "My ex-husband said the exact same thing," I responded, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room, "right up until he tried to claim half of my business in our divorce, despite having contributed nothing to its creation or growth." Trust your instincts. Protection isn't paranoia. It's simply good planning. A ripple of murmurs, then applause, filled the room. The boutique chain had expanded to 5 locations, each more successful than the last, generating significant revenue and employing over 30 people. The little shop Richard had mocked now boasted its own e-commerce platform and had been featured in several national magazines, often cited as a case study in female entrepreneurship. Through mutual friends, I learned that Richard had finally moved out of his parents' house and into a small, rented apartment above a garage, a space far humbler than any he had ever imagined for himself. He had been forced to take a significantly lower-paying job after his former company underwent a major restructuring, eliminating his position, a decision, I suspected, that was less about downsizing and more about the ongoing fallout from his behavior. His dating profile still optimistically described him as young at heart, though his profile picture was clearly from a decade ago, digitally smoothed and cropped to hide his aging features. Chloe, ironically, had become a regular customer at my original boutique, now my flagship store. She had earned her business degree, completed an internship, and launched her own successful social media consulting firm, often seeking my advice on business strategy. "You inspired me," she told me once, her gaze steady and sincere, showing me how a woman can build something enduring and real, instead of falling for empty promises and illusions of another person's escape. I kept Richard's cruel text message framed in my office, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of how far I had come, a marker of the turning point. Below it hung a custom-made sign, elegantly lettered, "Success is the best revenge." At the 5-year anniversary celebration of my first boutique, a grand affair attended by clients, local dignitaries, and employees, I stood addressing the crowd. The space had been transformed from a single little shop into the bustling, vibrant flagship store of a thriving business empire. Richard's mother attended, though I hadn't sent her an invitation. She waited until the crowd thinned to approach me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and quiet sorrow. "I saw Richard yesterday," she said, smoothing her hand over her designer dress, one she had purchased from my store, a recent acquisition. "He was talking about his glory days, about the life he could have had. He still doesn't grasp that he didn't lose everything in the divorce. He threw it all away, Amelia, piece by piece." I thought about that text message, his casual cruelty, his triumphant haha, his arrogant assumption that I would crumble without him, how he had expected me to plead and break, thereby proving him right about my supposed desperation and fragility. Instead, I had built something stronger, something more beautiful, something undeniably my own. Each new boutique, each successful year, was a testament to what women can achieve when they refuse to dim their own light for insecure men, when they choose resilience over regret. The young saleswoman I had hired last month, coincidentally also named Chloe, though with a different energy entirely, came over with a question about the new inventory system. As I patiently explained the process, my reflection caught my eye in the store window. I saw what Richard had failed to see 5 years ago, not a woman getting older, but one becoming wiser, stronger, more successful, and completely free. His cruel text message had been intended as an ending. Instead, it had been a spectacular, empowering beginning, not just for me, but for every woman who heard my story and realized she deserved better than to be a casualty of someone else's midlife crisis.